Well, good day, everybody. How's everybody doing today? The Duke is back with his Duke's Daily. A little bit of a sabbatical over the last week. My daughter was away visiting in Nova Scotia, so she was in need of a dog sitter. So yours truly had committed to that a while back, and so I've spent my last week babysitting the two dogs, which was a pretty interesting time to say the least. Especially when it came time to go taking them to the dog park, and one of the requirements there is you have to clean up the poo-poo. And that is not something I'm a big fan of. It actually has me freaking gagging for the most part when I'm when I'm having to do that. But the alternative is a $100 fine. So you learn to get past some things. Great little place. Great that, the city of Edmonton has a place that you can take your dogs. I assume there's probably multiple facilities that have that, where you can unleash your dog and just let them run with the other dogs. A real sense of freedom when you're watching that kind of unfold. They're having a lot of fun, and cold yesterday when I had to take them there, but I survived it after about 25 minutes, so all good and well. But anyway, we're back in the saddle. A little bit of change with how the format will be going forward. I think on Tuesdays, where we are doing the Sunday Night Sports Guy show, that'll be the show for the day. No Duke's Daily on Tuesdays, but we will use Thursdays as Top 10 Thursday. Keep it to the one day for that. And other shows that we do, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, will just be general sports talk as to what's going on. So today I just wanted to kind of take a look at what's been going on in the NHL, aside from, my schedule being as such. Still very much into the football and baseball aspect and things. Hockey's still in its early days, but I do see that we are we're up about the halfway mark of what people generally say in the NHL is that 25 game standard. Usually by the 25th game of a season, more times than not, we have a good idea of what's happening in the NHL, what you can expect from teams moving forward. Now, of course, as we know, the St. Louis Blues definitely put that to rest for last year, seeing as, what was it, by the end of January, they were last place, something like that, and we all know how that unfolded for them, winning their first ever Stanley Cup in Boston, and just an indicator that, and I think it is definitely going to be inspiring for a lot of teams moving forward, that your season isn't over when you get into a place like January and you're really bumbling it. If you have talent, of course, you can't be thinking, if you don't have talent, then obviously it's going to be hard to get back into the race. In St. Louis's particular instance, it was just a coaching change that seemed to really make a difference. Craig Berube comes in there, and the Blues just completely turned their season around. They had the leadership there. The rookie goaltender comes in, a la Ken Dryden, the Montreal Canadiens years ago, and they rode him. They rode on his coattails. Some of their key guys stepped up, and their defense, which is always vital if you're going to make a cup run, began to play to its standard. And so we're at this halfway to that critical point of what teams usually use as a measuring stick of how they feel their season is going to go. Critics, the same thing. And so I'm looking at some of the things here, at the standings. I've caught some games here and there. I'm making a better effort to watch more, catching more Bruins games this year than I did last year. And still kind of interesting, I know we've had this conversation about the salary cap and how teams are choosing to use their cap and what kind of results are happening. And it's still early days. It's hard to play this out, fully. It might be something that takes a couple of years. I mean, the data isn't so deep that you can make a conclusion, but it does seem ironic that the teams that decided to spend big bucks on a few players are either struggling or they're having problems with their secondary scoring and putting a lot of heat on their top players. And I'm talking particularly about, the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Edmonton Oilers. Now, living here in Spruce Grove, we are a suburb of the Edmonton city area. And so I listen to a lot on my ride to work, the TSN 1260, which is very hockey dominated here in Edmonton. And I hadn't really listened much last week because my drive was very short to work, being at my daughter's, like a 10-minute drive, 5-minute drive. And so I really didn't get a chance to listen too much to what was being said. Oh, by the way, got to put a plug in for my sister-in-law, Maureen. Thank you very much, Maureen, for making me this Bruins toque. And boy, I'm telling you, this keeps you really friggin' warm. I had to go to the shed today, get some tires out, put tires back in. Sharp wind we have here in the Edmonton area. Winter is really starting to make its presence now. Fall is going out the door. And so this is my toque. Very happy with it. I'm not usually a toque person. I very rarely wear it. I always wear a ball cap. But this son of a gun is keeping the head and the ears nicely warm. So really appreciate it. But getting back to the Oilers, it's all like they're sounding the alarms already. And here we are when we look at Edmonton. They are 8-3-1 right now. 37 goals for, 33 goals against. You would think, well, what are they crying about? Well, one of their big things is that most of the bulk of the scoring is coming from, Draisaitl and McDavid. James Neal, who came in that trade with for Lucic, has turned well. It's been a good deal for Edmonton so far, but a lot of his goals have been on the power play, right? And so they are beginning to really get concerned about their secondary scoring and what are they going to be able to do to correct the issue. Now, there's talk of Yamamoto, one of their prospects down on the farm in Bakersfield, perhaps coming up at some point in the season. But, Holland has been pretty adamant that unless a need really, really arises, he wants to keep his younger players down there. Ethan Bear was one that was supposed to start down there, but he got brought up once, Larson was hurt on defense, and it's worked out well for him so far. He's been a definite plus, big contributor to that, that 8-3-1 record that the Oilers have going for themselves. But, it's good to see that, Edmonton fans and the media here are treating it like they are a contender. Right now, you'd say they are a contender. The reality of it, and I'm pretty sure Ken Holland is a realist. He knows that, this is just, don't be deceived by what we're seeing so far. I think he's pretty aware about that secondary scoring issue. But when you're a bit up against that cap, and you don't really have the pieces to be able to trade to get that secondary scoring, it kind of is what it is. And they're going to go as far as, Draisaitl and McDavid go. They would anyway, but they're really going to be dependent upon them. I really don't see anybody making that change. Yamamoto might if he comes up late in the year, but they seem pretty dedicated to wanting to develop their players this time around, not unlike the Chiari, what's his name? Chiari, the guy that was in Boston. Chiarelli. And so different thinking here in Edmonton these days on how they want to move forward for the future. Now, I know there's a lot of pressure for the Oilers to make the playoffs. I mean, you have the best player in the world now. There's no disputing that now. McDavid clearly is the best player in the world, and his years are just being wasted. So I would tip my cap to Ken Holland if he can resist that temptation to try to, speed up the process. I think, he's probably talked to McDavid and he's probably explained what the plan is, where they're going, so that he knows, right? I mean, you're the highest paid, one of the highest paid or the highest paid player in the game. You're the best player in the world. So I imagine you're wondering what in the world is going to happen here. I've had one shot at the can, in the playoffs, and I think he's been in the league 4 years now, 4, I think. And so, them years are going by. And so I'm sure he would like to know, where are we going with this thing? And I think that's why Holland was brought in. He's a Stanley Cup champion. He's built, what he did in Detroit over time, especially after they had lost, some of their better players, and he still maintained a standard of excellence in Detroit. Now, looking at Toronto, who also was another one who has kind of taken, the philosophy of dumping the bigger part of their payroll, their salary cap, into a few players. And we have John Tavares, who's been injured here for the last little while, and it has not boded well for the Leafs. 13 games played, 6-5-2. 46 goals for, 45 goals against. They're still having the same problem in Toronto, which everybody knew was going to happen. You dump big money into your forwards who can score, but they can't play defense. They got no defensive play. It makes you wonder what's going on in Toronto. Is it Mike Babcock? I see the other night some of the Leafs fans were, quite upset about Hutchison starting against the Montreal Canadiens. Right? I'm not sure if that was a back-to-back and they didn't want to go with Anderson in that one. I don't really know what the whole record is with Anderson and the Canadiens. Maybe he doesn't have a good record. And so they're not happy about that. Babcock is coming under an extreme amount of scrutiny. If you've watched the Sunday Night Sports Guy shows at all, you'll recall maybe one of the editions where, T-Mac talked about where, he lives in Cobourg, Ontario, very close to Toronto, and so he plays some pickup hockey on Sunday mornings. And all those guys in there, him being a Montreal fan though, a lot of Toronto fans in there, and they have no problem expressing their feelings on what they think about Mike Babcock. They think he's overrated. Coaching Team Canada. Anybody could coach Team Canada and get 2 gold medals with that squad. Just a lot of negativity towards Babcock. And you know what? I think, Babcock is in a position now that he has to be producing. If you recall, when he first come, everybody was happy in Toronto, as well as they should have been, because at the time you were getting the best coach in the world. Well, the time of reckoning has come upon the Toronto Maple Leafs and Mike Babcock. And I would have to think that if this continues on this right around 500 type play, that you're going to see a switch and a change made in Toronto. It's already been known that him and Kyle Dubas relationship it's so-so. It's probably not where it needs to be from a coach and a general manager. I think the only thing that's holding Dubas completely back might be Mike Shanahan, or Brendan Shanahan, who has a tremendous amount of say in that organization. He may be the one that's holding the gun being pulled. And, but how far can you go? How much trust? I mean, has he had enough time, that this team should be in a different place? The other argument is that you can only coach what you got, right? If you don't have players that buy into playing a defensive style hockey, you're in for a hard time. And that's a bit about what's happening here in Edmonton, why they have gotten off to the start. They have, again, 8-3-1 so far in their first, how many games have they been? Take a peek here, 12 games. So 8-3-1, there's nothing wrong with that. They are playing better defensively. 37 goals for, 33 against, +4 overall. Getting some real solid goaltending from their combination of Smith and Koskinen. But with Toronto, the same old story. And there's no doubt Toronto's going to make the playoffs. This isn't hit the panic button. But I think if you're Toronto, you want to see this team taking that next step. You have to get out of that first round. I mean, that's just a given. I don't think if that happens, if they don't get past that, definitely Babcock's going to be gone. Just my own opinion on that. But I kind of get the impression his tenure in Toronto is quickly approaching. Excuse me. So that's kind of, a couple of things there that I'm picking up on. Great game for the Florida Panthers the other day. They came into Edmonton here, played the Oilers really tough. Big road win for them. So, they're kind of holding down the third spot in the Atlantic Division. It's kind of interesting. Buffalo still in there. What a great story in Buffalo. Ralph Kruger, the guy who was coach of the Edmonton Oilers, only got the 1 year and they fired him. Like, it just, that Kevin Lowe, Craig McTavish era, my goodness, what destruction they brought upon this Edmonton Oilers franchise, the old boys club, ruling the roost for as long as they have, and what did it ever produce? not too much. They did get a crack at the Stanley Cup back in the 2000s, but that was it. Until Chiarelli came along. They did have that 1 year here a few years ago, but Ralph Krueger is widely respected in the game of hockey. And, one of the things I'm hearing about Krueger of what he's doing is that he's not spending a lot of time he's not having his players spend loads and loads of time in the film room. Now, apparently in the NHL, that's something that's very ongoing. Probably is in a lot of sports. I know football, you hear a lot about with, Belichick and how he keeps, he has a lot of video time with the team going over things. But apparently in hockey, it's even more so. A lot of individual, one-on-one stuff with people. But apparently, Krueger is doing the one-on-one, but he's keeping it very short. 4 or 5 minutes, quickly go over what he wants to tell you, and that's it. Not beating the horse, keeping these guys in front of a video screen for 10, 15 minutes, because as we know today, the athletes are different. They're much different than what they used to be. And apparently this is working. I mean, when you look at that, 42 goals for, 30 against the Buffalo Sabres. Wow. 9-2-1, leading the Atlantic Division, a point over the Bruins, who are 8-1-2. And, here's the Bruins. This is a team that does not have salary cap problems in terms of paying all their money out to 3, 4, 5 players. They're spread across. Their cap is spread. And who's been any more consistent than the Bruins over the last 5, 6 years, right? I mean, I think they've done pretty good to stay competitive, making the playoffs on a steady basis, right? So, is there still an art? I still think. I don't think you can. I don't know. I guess we'll learn more as we go along. I don't proclaim to be a hockey expert on this, but cap is cap, regardless of the league you're playing in. And it's like baseball. You have these big contracts going to these guys like Machado in San Diego, Trout in Anaheim, Harper in Philly. Like, gee whiz, man, that's big money. And you're tying into one guy. I have to think you're kind of hamstringing yourself a bit with how you can, have flexibility with your roster. And, for the Bruins, 8-1-2, a great start. No Stanley Cup hangover there. They didn't win the cup, but they were in the cup final. Lost by, what they lost in the game 7. And they just seem to be on a mission right now of determination to get the job done this time around. But we'll see what happens. Hockey's a long season too, 82 games. Injuries are the key. If you can be healthy coming down the stretch and you can get on that roll that that has proven out, if you come into the playoffs not on a roll, it is very hard to get one going, especially against teams who have that roll. Look at St. Louis. I mean, their role was extremely long. It's what they accomplished last year is nothing short of a miracle. Trying to save your playoff ass in January, and they're essentially playing Game 7s pretty well from that point till the Game 7 of the finals and things. Other things of note: Pittsburgh. A lot of people were thinking this is a year Pittsburgh wasn't going to make the playoffs. Here they sit at 7-5. Them in Toronto holding down a wild card. The biggest disappointment, I think, coming out of the East so far is what is going on in New Jersey. That is just atrocious. They've only played 9 games. They have games in hand on a lot of these guys, 3, 4 in some instances, sitting there with 6 points. So, I mean, if you could, say you played 4 straight games to catch up on everything and you want them, that's 8 points. You're at 14. You're back in the mix. But not sure what's happening in New Jersey right now with the talent they have. They are having issues, in trying to get Taylor Hall re-signed. There's some thought that he doesn't want to be there anymore. I don't know. Maybe he wants to play somewhere in Canada. Not sure how that will work out, but that's a situation definitely worth watching. Tampa Bay, not out to the start that they had last year. Makes you wonder, like, thinking-wise, philosophically, or stuff like this. Like, do we pace ourselves this year? Well, right now they're sitting 2 points out of a playoff spot. Having played 10 games, they have games in hand on everybody as well. Like I said, it is very early days, but just some things to kind of point out and talk on. Tampa Bay clearly has, extreme amount of talent, and there's nothing saying that they can't rip off, a 15 wins out of 20 games type thing, 15-5, 16-8, something like that. You could see that very well happening. Canadians, 41 goals for, 36 against, not bad. That's +5. Habs with only 11 games, so one never knows what's going to happen there. I think they do need a bit more scoring, Montreal, if they're going to compete with the other bigger boys. And, of course, Price has to keep doing what he does, and how much longer he can do that, not really sure. Colorado having a great start to the year. A lot of people picking Colorado to win the Stanley Cup, and they are not disappointing so far. Tough division, though. Nashville, St. Louis, defending Stanley Cup champion there, Stanley Cup finalist 2 years ago in the Predators. So, Colorado's got its hands full there, but looking very good early on. Vegas trailing the Oilers by a point. Edmonton with a game in hand there. I think Vegas will just they're going to be right there. And I think at some point, when Edmonton starts to come to the reality of knowing that they're the Edmonton Oilers of this year, don't mean it isn't going to get better, Oiler fans, but I don't foresee the Edmonton Oilers winning this division. Vegas is still very much the class of the division, and having added Mark Stone last year was definitely a big pickup for them. Calgary led they had the most points in the Western Conference last year, kind of like with Tampa, kind of just not really hitting their stride yet, which is okay. Makes you wonder, though, again, on that point, does these teams look at, coming out of the gate the way they did and not getting the result, like the end result not happening what it is? And it must be tough, because I'm sure you don't sit there and say, well, you know what, we're going to go hard for the first 12 games, try to get as much as we can, but then we're going to rest for the next 5, but I don't think you can do that. I don't even think that's even, done or thought of in a sport, but it's just curious, right? It's curious how that goes. Winnipeg, 6-6, you got to tip your cap to the Jets, still playing tough, minus the defense they've lost over the past year, still in there. Dallas, definitely another disappointment. They're probably the New Jersey Devils of the West, 4-8-1. But again, that's a team with a lot of talent, right? A lot of talent. We'll see what happens up until that 25 game mark. And if nothing's changing, if they're kind of still sputtering, I suspect you could see a coaching change in Dallas as well. Team I thought might improve a little bit this year would have been the Blackhawks. And I think, even though it's still early days, Chicago, there's a team that tied up money into a few players after they had gained them success, got them to 3 Stanley Cups, and then rewarded them. Not working out so well in Chicago. But you know what? Who knows? Time will tell eventually with some of these teams. Vancouver hanging around out there, 6-3-1, 35 goals for, 25 against. So a lot of these teams, their defensive record is showing to be a lot better than it has been. So anyway, it's been great getting back in the saddle here. Kind of just thought I'd start this week with a bit of hockey. Cold enough out here for hockey. Had to change my tires today, get our winter tires onto the car and things. So the seasonal changes is really beginning to happen here in the Edmonton area. Just a reminder, tomorrow night, the Sunday Night Sports Guys will be live and in color. T-Mac, Bladesy, and myself. Haven't decided on a time yet. It could be 4 Mountain Time or 5 o'clock Mountain Time. Make the adjustment for your time zone soon as I find out from T-Mac when he plans to be, what's going to work best for him. Then I'll do a bit of a promo for the show for tomorrow night. But keep an eye out. Most of you guys do with your Facebook feed. You'll get our notification that we're going to be on there. So we will be here on the Sportsnet Guys Sunday Night Sports Guys Facebook page is where our show will be coming from. So anyway, guys, have yourselves a great day. Thanks for tuning in, and look forward to seeing you tomorrow night with my 2 colleagues. See you then. Have a great one.